Chosen one, stop what you are doing right now. Not because I am asking for your attention, because something was hidden from you about your own life, something that the forces working against you have spent considerable effort making sure you never discovered. And I am about to tell you what it is. This is not motivation dressed up as revelation. This is not a message for everyone who stumbled across this video. What I carry into this moment is specific intelligence about who you actually are in the invisible realm. Intelligence that Lucifer himself has been working to keep buried. Because the moment you understand it, everything he has built around your life collapses. I do not speak to crowds. I speak to the ones whose very existence represents a problem that the darkness has never been able to solve. The ones who were targeted not randomly, not by coincidence, but with deliberate precision, because something in them was identified as a threat before they ever understood themselves. And what I am about to reveal is the reason your life has been as hard as it has been. Not because you were weak, not because you lacked faith, but because you were carrying something that Lucifer recognized long before you did. Something that made you the one thing he has never encountered in the entire span of his existence. His only weakness. Subscribe to this channel right now and activate every notification. If you are already subscribed, I see you. And I want you to know that your presence here is not something I take lightly. That faithfulness is seen. It is recorded. And it matters more than you know. Write 777 in the comments the moment something in this message starts landing, as confirmation of what you have already sensed, but could never put into words. Stay until the very end. Because what I am building toward the climax of this entire message, the moment where everything I have been laying out finally detonates with its full weight, does not arrive until the final section. And there is something sealed inside that final section that will only release its full meaning if you have received everything that comes before it. Leaving early would mean leaving before the most important thing anyone has ever told you about who you really are. Now, before I take you into what Lucifer identified in you, I need to destroy something that has been used against you your entire life. The idea that you are ordinary. I do not mean ordinary in a motivational sense. I am not about to tell you that you are special because everyone is special. That is not what this is. I mean ordinary in a specific, measurable, observable sense. The sense that what you carry inside you is something that most human beings walking this earth simply do not have. Not because they are lesser, because what you carry was deposited in a specific kind of soul for a specific kind of purpose. And that purpose has been in motion since before you were born. There is a reason you have always felt different from the people around you. Not better. Different. Like the world was operating by a set of rules that made perfect sense to everyone else, but that you somehow could not fully accept. Like there was something underneath the surface of everything you were shown that nobody around you seemed to want to acknowledge. That feeling was not delusion. It was accurate perception. You were seeing something real, something that most people have been conditioned not to see. And that capacity to perceive what others miss is not a personality quirk. It is a spiritual faculty. It is part of what makes you exactly what Lucifer has spent your entire life trying to neutralize. Because here is what you need to understand about your enemy before anything else I say will make sense. Lucifer is not stupid. He is not a cartoon villain making random attacks on random people for no reason. He is a being of extraordinary intelligence and ancient strategy, who has been studying human souls for longer than recorded history. He understands the invisible architecture of a person better than most people understand themselves. He can look at a soul and identify what it carries, what it was made for, what it would become if it ever reached its full expression. And when he looked at you, Something happened that I need you to understand completely. He recognized a threat. Not a general threat. Not the generic threat that any believer represents to darkness. A specific, targeted, carefully assessed threat that required a specific, targeted, carefully constructed response. Because what you carry is not common, and Lucifer knows the difference between common and uncommon better than anyone. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Most people focus on the word devour when they read that verse. But the word I want you to focus on is seeking. Seeking implies selection. Seeking implies a process of identification and assessment. Seeking implies that not every soul receives the same level of attention, the same intensity of opposition, the same carefully engineered resistance. Lions do not select their targets randomly. They study the herd. They identify. They assess. They pursue what is worth pursuing. And when your life has been characterized by opposition that feels disproportionate to your circumstances, when the resistance you have faced seems larger than what your situation seems to justify, when the attacks have been too specific, too precise, too perfectly aimed at exactly the things that would have stopped you if they had worked, that is not bad luck. That is recognition. You were seen. You were assessed. And what was assessed was deemed worth a level of opposition that ordinary souls simply do not receive. Let that land in you for a moment. The very intensity of what has come against you is one of the most powerful confirmations of the significance of what you carry. Now I need to take you somewhere in Scripture that is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about how spiritual warfare actually works. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations, you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High, but you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. 5 times he said, I will. 5 declarations of what he intended to achieve. 5 statements of a plan so ambitious, so specifically designed, so carefully constructed, that it required being removed from heaven entirely before it could be executed. And every single one of those 5 declarations failed. Not because the plan was poorly conceived, because there is a power in the universe that Lucifer has never been able to overcome, calculate, or predict. A power that operates through something he fundamentally cannot replicate, and that something lives inside you. Let me show you what it is. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 through 17 describes Lucifer before his fall in detail that most people skip past because it feels abstract. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub. For so I ordained you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God. And I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. Did you catch it? He was full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, adorned with precious stones, anointed as guardian, blameless from the day he was created. And the one thing that destroyed all of it was pride. He corrupted his wisdom because of his splendor. His own magnificence became the thing that blinded him. His own perfection became the door through which his downfall entered. And this is the first layer of why you are his weakness. Because what makes you dangerous is not your perfection. It is your brokenness that kept going. Your imperfection that stayed faithful. Your inconsistency that still believed. Your falling that still got up. Lucifer cannot understand that. It is outside his category of comprehension. A being who fell from perfection into corruption cannot calculate the trajectory of someone who fell from imperfection into perseverance. Your weakness is your strength. In a language he does not speak, he keeps fighting you with strategies designed to defeat the kind of soul he understands. And you keep surviving, not because you are stronger than his strategies, but because you are a different kind of being than the kind those strategies were designed for. That is why he has never seen anyone like you. Not because you are without fault, because your fault lines did not produce the outcome his playbook predicted. And every time you survived what should have ended you, his confusion about you deepened. Now, let me take you into the specific nature of what he identified in you, because this is where I need to get precise about the thing that makes you his weakness, in a way that cannot be explained away as flattery. There is a concept in Scripture that gets translated in different ways, depending on the version you are reading. In Hebrew, the word is nephesh. In Greek, it is pneuma. Both are trying to describe the same reality, the innermost core of a person, the part that was directly breathed into existence by God himself, the part that exists at a frequency that nothing in the created order produced. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Breathed. Not created from a distance, not spoken into existence with a word. Breathed. The closest possible proximity, the most intimate act of creation in the entire Genesis account. God put his own breath, his own pneuma, directly into the human soul. And here's what that means in terms of spiritual warfare. Lucifer was created. He was spoken into existence and adorned with gifts, but he was never breathed into. He never received what you received. He never had the direct deposit of divine breath at the core of his being, which means there is something inside you that is, at its deepest level, made of the same substance as God himself. Not equal to God, not divine in the sense that you are God, but carrying something of his nature in your innermost core that no other order of created being was ever given. And Lucifer knows this. He has always known this. It is why he targeted humanity from the beginning. Not out of random cruelty, out of recognition, out of the understanding that these beings, made of dust but breathed into by the Most High, carry something he was never given and can never replicate. Your weakness in the natural realm is his reminder of what he lost and can never have. Your persistence in faith is a demonstration of the very thing he rejected. Every time you choose to believe when the evidence argues against belief, every time you pray when silence has been the only answer, every time you extend grace when bitterness would have been justified, you are doing something with the divine breath inside you that infuriates him at a level that goes beyond strategy. It is personal for him. It has always been personal, and it is personal in a way that makes you his weakness. Because what he cannot replicate, he cannot neutralize. What he cannot understand, he cannot predict. And what he cannot predict, he cannot stop. Now, I want to bring you into a story that is going to make everything I have just said feel like it happened to someone you know. There was a city in ancient times that sat at the center of every major trade route in the region. Merchants from every direction passed through it. Armies had fought over it for generations. Empires had tried to hold it and lost it and tried again. And in that city there lived a family that everyone considered cursed, not in the dramatic religious sense, in the ordinary, mundane, grinding sense that looks like chronic bad luck to observers and feels like divine abandonment to the ones inside it. The father had started 3 businesses and watched all 3 collapse before they reached their potential. Not through his own fault, but through circumstances that seemed to conspire against him with eerie precision. A flood that destroyed his storehouse. A partnership that ended in betrayal. A year of drought that wiped out his investment in a farming cooperative. The mother had buried 2 children before they reached adulthood. She carried that grief in the particular way that women of her era were expected to carry it. Quietly, efficiently, without burdening others, while continuing to manage a household that never quite had enough. And their youngest son watched all of this from the time he was old enough to understand what watching meant. He absorbed the pattern of his family's life, the way children absorb everything, not through deliberate study, but through constant proximity. And he drew a conclusion that he never said out loud, but that shaped every decision he made. He concluded that people like him, families like his, did not receive what other people seemed to receive. That there was a ceiling in his world that did not exist in other worlds, that the quality of what you were born into determined the boundary of what you could become. He lived inside that conclusion for years, not bitterly, not dramatically, quietly, with the kind of resigned acceptance that passes for wisdom when it is actually surrender. And then, one day a traveler came through the city, carrying goods from a distant region, and the young man was assigned to assist with the unloading at the gate. And as they worked, the traveler spoke, not preaching, not lecturing, just speaking the way people who have seen much of the world speak when they are tired and not guarding their words. He said something that the young man had never heard framed that way before. He said, "The walls you see around your life are not made of stone. They are made of conclusions, and conclusions can be examined, and examined conclusions can be changed." The young man did not respond. He finished unloading the goods and the traveler moved on. But something in those 2 sentences reached a place inside him that nothing had ever reached before. Not comfort, not inspiration. Something more precise than either. Something that landed in the deepest part of him and began slowly to move. He did not become successful overnight. He did not have a dramatic reversal of fortune that resolved all of his family's problems in a single season. But he stopped accepting the ceiling. And that single shift, that single refusal to treat the boundary of his experience as the boundary of his possibility, produced a chain of decisions that eventually changed not just his own trajectory, but the trajectory of everyone connected to him. Decades later, when people looked back at the moment when everything changed for that family, they did not point to a dramatic event. They pointed to a young man unloading goods at a city gate who heard 2 sentences from a tired traveler and decided that the conclusions he had been living inside were not the final word on his life. You are that young man. And the conclusions that were built around your life, the ones that told you there was a ceiling you could not exceed, that people like you did not receive what others received, that the pattern of your history was the prediction of your future. Those conclusions were not made of stone. They were made of what Lucifer needed you to believe to keep you manageable, and manageable is the last thing you are. If something in this message has already started landing as confirmation of what your spirit has known but your mind kept questioning, write these words in the comments. I am not ordinary. not as a boast, as an examined conclusion, as the first sentence of a truth you are no longer willing to leave buried. Now I want to show you the 5 specific characteristics that make you his weakness. Not in a general sense, in the precise, observable, documentable sense that you have been demonstrating your entire life without realizing that is what you were doing. The first is that you process pain without becoming pain. This is rarer than it sounds. Most people who go through significant suffering develop a relationship with that suffering that eventually defines them. The pain becomes identity. The wound becomes personality. The loss becomes the primary lens through which all future experience is filtered. You have been through things that should have produced that outcome, and something in you, something that you probably cannot fully explain, and have not been able to take credit for, refuse to let the pain write the final chapter of who you are. You processed it, you carried it, but you did not become it. And in the invisible realm, that refusal is registered as something that Lucifer cannot account for in his strategy. Because his strategies are built around the predictable mathematics of pain, they assume that enough pressure produces a specific kind of person, and you are not producing the predicted person. The second characteristic is that you believe against evidence. Not stupidly, not in denial of reality, but in the specific, costly way that faith operates when there is nothing visible to support it. You have prayed prayers that went unanswered in the time frame you needed. You have believed things that circumstances argued against. You have held on to something you could not see when everything you could see gave you permission to let go. That kind of faith is not common, and it is specifically what Lucifer's strategies are designed to erode. Because faith at that level is what releases the things he cannot block. The third characteristic is that you cannot be permanently silenced. You have been through seasons of deep quiet. Seasons where you withdrew, where you pulled back, where the expression of who you are was muffled by exhaustion or pain or the accumulated weight of disappointment. And every single time, something in you eventually surfaced again. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but consistently, the voice comes back. The fire returns. The thing that makes you specifically you reasserts itself, despite every attempt to muffle it permanently. Lucifer has learned this about you, and it is maddening to him, because a permanently silenced chosen one is a neutralized threat, and you will not stay silent. The fourth characteristic is that your love survives betrayal. This one is perhaps the most costly of the 5, because love that survives betrayal is not naive love that did not understand the betrayal. It is love that understood fully and chose not to be defined by what it suffered. It is love that held the wound clearly and still chose to remain open to the possibility of genuine connection. You have been betrayed by people you trusted, specifically, repeatedly, in ways that would have justified complete emotional withdrawal from any further investment in other people. And something in you still reaches toward genuine human connection, still wants to believe that real love is possible, still refuses to close entirely even after being hurt badly enough to justify it. That quality is devastating to the forces that want you isolated, because isolated chosen ones are contained, chosen ones, and your refusal to be permanently isolated, despite every reason you have been given, keeps your impact expanding in ways that cannot be controlled. The fifth characteristic is that your purpose accelerates when your circumstances deteriorate. This one is specific to you, and it is something that the darkness has observed with something that can only be described as bewilderment. Most people, when their circumstances become significantly harder, slow down, retreat, conserve. The natural human response to increased pressure is to reduce exposure and protect what remains you create. When you were in your darkest seasons, something in you did not retreat into protection mode. It moved toward expression, toward output, toward building something that had no guarantee of working in conditions that had given you no reason to believe it would. The things you built in your hardest moments are your best evidence for this. Not in spite of the difficulty, in the middle of it, as a direct response to it. And this is the characteristic that Lucifer finds most disorienting, because his entire strategy depends on the assumption that enough pressure will produce enough retreat. And you keep building under pressure. He has never seen anyone like you. Not because you are without fault, because your fault lines did not produce his predicted outcome. Now, I need to stop and tell you something that I did not plan to include in this message. But as I was preparing what comes next, something pressed on my spirit that I cannot ignore. And it concerns someone you have lost. There is a person who is no longer in this world, whose absence changed the architecture of your daily life. Not just emotionally, structurally, the way your mornings work, the way silence sounds in your home, the way certain dates on the calendar carry a weight that nobody around you fully registers anymore. Because enough time has passed that the world expects you to have moved on. But you have not moved on. Not really. You have moved forward, which is different. Moving on means the wound closed. Moving forward means you learned to walk while it stayed open. And here's what I need you to understand about that person, in the context of everything I have just told you. The opposition that came against your life did not only target you, it targeted the people around you, the people who would have spoken into you when you were too exhausted to speak into yourself. The people who would have reminded you who you were during the seasons when you forgot. Some of those people were removed, not randomly, precisely. And the grief you carry for them, that specific, private, unfinished grief, that lives in a room inside you that you do not often open, that grief is not weakness. It is evidence that you loved at a depth that Lucifer needed to disrupt. Evidence that the connections you form carry a weight in the spiritual realm that ordinary connections do not carry. Evidence that your capacity for loyalty, for devotion, for the kind of love that does not forget, is exactly the faculty that makes you dangerous. They see you, not from a distant heaven, not from behind a wall, from the place where divine breath returns to the one who gave it. And what they see when they look at you now is not the grief. It is the person who kept going after the grief, and that person the one who absorbed the loss and still did not become what the loss was designed. To produce that person is the one Lucifer has no strategy for. If you felt something shift inside you just now, if a face appeared in your mind before I finished, that paragraph, hold it. Do not push it down. That is not sentimentality. That is recognition across a boundary that Lucifer cannot patrol. There is something I want to offer you here, and I want to be direct about what it is and why. What I have been laying out in this message is the surface layer of an intelligence map that goes deeper than what can be delivered in a single sitting. There is a complete guide written, recorded, and built specifically for the ones who recognize themselves in what I have described, that takes each of these 5 characteristics and traces them into practical, daily application. How to operate consciously in the identity that makes you his weakness. How to recognize the specific strategies deployed against your type of soul. How to stop fighting blind and start fighting informed. It is available through the link in the description and the pinned comment. It costs less than a single meal. It comes with what you receive tonight from fading under the noise of tomorrow. But I need you to hear this clearly. If your spirit is not leading you there, do not go. What was released over your life tonight does not depend on what you purchase. It depends on what you believe. And if you have believed this far, you have already activated more than most people ever will. The guide exists for those who want to go further. It does not exist as a gate between you and what God already sealed over you. Now I need to warn you about something that is going to happen as a direct consequence of what you are receiving in this message. There is a pattern that operates in the invisible realm around moments of significant revelation. When a chosen one receives clarity about their identity, when the veil over who they actually are begins to thin, when the true nature of their impact on the forces of darkness becomes visible to them, there is a response, not a dramatic response, not a spectacular spiritual battle with visible signs and obvious warfare. A quiet response, subtle, precisely designed. It will come as doubt arriving in a familiar voice, the voice of someone you trust or the voice of your own reasoning, telling you that what you just received is too good to be true, that people like you do not actually occupy this level of significance in the invisible realm, that this message is just what people tell themselves to feel better. It will come as circumstance. Something ordinary will go wrong in the hours or days following this message, and the temptation will be to interpret that wrongness as evidence that none of what you heard was real. It will come as distraction. Something urgent and legitimate will demand your attention and pull you away before you have had time to let what you received settle into the part of you that needed to hear it. When it comes, and it will come, I need you to do one thing. Remember the 5 characteristics, not as a list, as a mirror. Look at your own life and ask yourself honestly whether what I described matches the person you have actually been. Not the person you wish you were, not the person you feel like on your worst days, but the person your actual history reveals. If the answer is yes, then what I told you about who you are in the invisible realm is not a story designed to make you feel better. It is an accurate account of why you have been opposed the way you have been opposed. The intensity of the opposition is the measurement of the significance of what it was opposing, and significant things do not stay hidden forever. Now I want to tell you about the moment in Scripture where Lucifer's specific limitation is revealed most clearly, the moment where you can see, in text, exactly what the weakness looks like from the inside of the story. The book of Job, chapters 1 and 2. God points Job out to the adversary. The adversary says, Job is only faithful because God has protected him. Remove the protection and he will curse God to his face, and God allows the test. Now here is what most people miss when they read this account. The adversary had to ask permission. He did not launch the attack independently. He did not act on his own authority. He had to go before the throne, make his case, and wait for authorization before he could touch a single thing in Job's life. That is not the picture of an all-powerful enemy acting freely. That is the picture of an enemy operating under jurisdiction, under limitation. Under a ceiling, he cannot penetrate without permission from a higher authority, and the higher authority that limits him is the same authority that deposited divine breath in you. Think about what this means for the attacks in your life. Every assault that came against you, every loss, every betrayal, every closed door, every season that felt like everything was falling apart simultaneously. None of it happened outside of a jurisdiction that was already monitoring it. None of it landed on you without first passing through a permission structure that you did not see, but that was operating on your behalf. That does not mean it did not hurt. It does not mean it was not real. It means it was not uncontrolled. It was not unlimited. It was not the unbounded destruction of an enemy with no constraints. It was a carefully limited test by an adversary who had to ask before he could touch you. And in Job's case, after everything the adversary was permitted to do after the loss of his children, his wealth, his health, everything visible that defined his life, after all of that, the adversary returned to the heavenly court. And God said to him, "Have you considered my servant Job? He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." Without any reason. God acknowledged that what Job suffered had no cause rooted in Job's failure. It was not punishment. It was not consequence. It was demonstration. Heaven showing darkness what it could not produce through its own power, a soul that retained its integrity under conditions that should have stripped it away completely. Your life has had seasons that looked, from the outside, like you should not have survived them intact. The survival was the point, not the comfortable life on the other side of the trial. The survival itself, the fact that what was inside you could not be extracted by what came against you, the fact that the divine breath deposited at your core could not be suffocated by the weight of what was placed on top of it. That is what he has never seen before, in you specifically. Not perfection surviving trials, imperfection surviving trials without becoming what the trials were designed to make it become. Luke chapter